Hi everyone and welcome to Style American. It is a pleasure to have with us today one of the greatest British documentary filmmaker is Mr. Angus Macqueen. Hi Angus, how are you?
Hello, I'm very well. I'm delighted to be called one of the greatest.
Well, you are. There you go.
There we are.
Okay, so first thing first, I would like to ask you, how does it feel for you to be here at the Biografilm Festival with a retrospective dedicated to your filmography?
It makes me feel very old.
No.
It's a real honour and it's a delight, but it's my friends back in Britain and my son, who's here, laughed when they discovered that I was having a retrospective, and it did make me feel very old because you hope. I haven't seen a lot of the films that we're screening this week since I made them, really. So it's a strange process. You try not to look back at your work in that way, but it's quite fun. It's great. It's an amazing honour and a delight.
Just to inform our audience, so there are actually at the moment here at the festival The Last Peace and Temptation and Cocaine, Leo and Z, Ingrid Betancourt, 6 Years in the Jungle, The Legend of Shorty, and End of Aden. And I'm going to leave that for later on.
Okay.
Okay, so I want to ask you, just going into your work, so how did the passion for documentaries started for you?
Well, it's a sort of very strange thing. As somebody pointed out, everything they're showing in the festival, in part it's for technical reasons actually, is of the 21st century. But in fact, half my career, I'm that old, was in the 20th century. Mm-hmm. And so the beginnings of me making documentary are to do with the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe.
Right.
And until 2001, in fact, Last Peasants is in some ways the last of the films. It was about Romania and illegal immigration. I made my career out of the fact I speak Russian and Polish. I lived in the Soviet Union before the fall of the wall in Siberia. And so I made a series of films, and that is how I blackmailed people to let me make films because I had this expertise. And as I began to discover I rather liked making the films because the initial drive was journalistic.
Right.
But was, I covered the war in Yugoslavia, I covered the fall of Gorbachev in really big series made over a number of years, but the impulse was journalistic as opposed to artistic. And then I made a huge film at the end of the 1990s, which was called Gulag, which was a sort of monument. It was 3 hours long. I did see that recently, and it's a monument to what happened in the 20th century. And so these films are very much the 21st century. And at a certain point, in fact, with Cocaine, I stopped doing Eastern Europe, and I got absolutely fascinated by the issue of drugs and illegal drugs. And I've ended up doing about 6 or 7 films in that area, which includes Cocaine and also a film they showed on Sunday,
The Legend of
Shorty, which was about the supposed search for the most wanted man in the world, El Chapo Guzman. And subsequent to that, really, they're the films you make because something happens and something comes to you. So Ingrid Betancourt isn't about drugs, it's about Ingrid Betancourt, who's a hostage. But what happened was we made contact with the FARC when she was a hostage and tried to get to her. We were one of the few people who got seriously close, I think, actually. And she discovered that, and when she came out, we made contact, and she gave the only interview she's ever given. And each of these subjects gives you a different challenge, a different task. And so I actually think I mean, I think it's interesting. It's so difficult talking about your own work. It's sort of you that would say. I think they're very, very different films.
Yeah.
Last Peasants is a very simple, long observational series with a degree of construct, because it's a degree of storytelling construct, shall I say, because it's about illegal immigration, and we had to work out how to do that. And Ingrid Betancourt is very much based on interviews, three big interviews, and The Legend of Shorty is me and Guillermo going on a journey that we believed proved a point. And so I hope the films are very different in texture, and the subject requires treatment in different ways. And so Oink, the film that's opening tonight here, is again completely different. It's a conceptual film in many ways.
I'm going to actually go back to The Legend of Shorty. So I've seen that there is actually truth mixed to some part of film narration to it, which I really, really loved, I have to say. So
Good, thank you.
How do you build this kind of narration? So how do you think about this? How do you research it?
Okay, Shorty had a very odd history. When I made the Cocaine series, it was a series of 3 programs in 2005, and they were set in Peru, Brazil, and Colombia. We always wanted to make a film in Mexico because we'd seen the way in which the American pressure on the cartels in Colombia had shifted the power to Mexico. It had done nothing to stop people consuming drugs or growing or making them. It had just moved the structures of power. And I've forgotten how it quite happened, but in a conversation, somebody said to me, there's this man, Chapo Guzman, who escaped from prison in a laundry basket. And we'd heard this story, and we had pitched it. And then suddenly there was interest, and I rang my colleague, who I've made a lot of films with, Guillermo Galdos in Lima, and basically he just said to me, he said, Angus, if we're going to do that, we can make an interesting, descriptive film. But the truth is, I think we can find him. And so we tried to find him. And because he was technically the most wanted man in the world, and you had the DEA, the American anti-drugs, and you had the Mexican government saying it was the biggest manhunt. And yet Guillermo and I were convinced we knew exactly where he was.
There you go.
And we found him exactly where we thought he was. Sadly, he didn't give us the interview, but our colleague did, find him, did meet him. It wasn't that we pretended that he did actually meet him. He just twice said he'd give us an interview, and then he didn't, and then he let us meet his mother, and etc. And it's an odd film because at the moment we started engaging with it, we realised that he was a sort of mythical figure.
Right.
And in so many ways, he mattered, he was important, he was very rich. But on the other hand, he didn't matter at all. He was a symbol. And again, they've caught El Chapo Guzman. Is there less cocaine, heroin, marijuana, methamphetamine in the United States today than there was before they caught him? No.
Not at all.
Not at all. These figures are creations, and people are still making, and I don't know what your legal situation is, but the banks like HSBC, all the banks are still making money out of those. Huge businessmen are. The money from all that is so now entwined in the system, in the the capitalist system that we live in. And so what I wanted to do was, I think it's summed up. I came up with a word for what I think the situation in Mexico is. And I think the situation in Mexico is a tragic farce.
Yeah.
And the tragedy is that, this figure is so overwhelming that you don't believe it, but it's true. over 130,000 people have died in the last decade in the war on drugs, related to the war on drugs in Mexico.
Yeah.
More people were dying there than were dying in Iraq.
Right, yeah.
Yeah? And yet, nobody is telling any truth about it. And so it's a farce.
It is indeed, yeah.
And so one group will kill another group, and I could tell you extraordinary stories. And the funny thing was, at one point when we were negotiating, it took us an awful long time, obviously, and we were negotiating with these figures who were one layer down. We had one meeting, we estimated, where the value of the three people in the house, we didn't see one of them, on the US wanted list was $35 million. Could have made $35 million. but the farce of it was, we said, and we asked them, we said, so why are you taking us seriously? Why are you letting us talk to you? We said, because actually nobody's come and asked us before.
There you go. As simple as
So
that.
it's funny. The film's been criticised. I think there's a validity to it that there's probably a bit too much of Guillermo and me, and we could have done something more formal, but it was the only way to communicate the lunacy. We thought,
Definitely.
And then there's the music, which people, I don't know if you. The music is based on Mexican music, but is our music.
Yes.
We had it composed, and the lyrics are ours. It's a sort of. I at one point wanted to do the whole film as a documentary opera, but I just couldn't quite pull it off. But there is an element that the film's an opera, and
there is actually, and that's something very, very original to say.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
And the man who wrote it and performed it is this Englishman who just so happens to be bilingual and a genius, I think.
Definitely.
I think
Absolutely.
he's brilliant.
Yeah, because it feels like, I don't know, like mariachi songs or
and
something
he sounds
this.
like Leonard Cohen at the beginning of the film. I mean, it's
true.
extraordinary voice he has.
Absolutely.
Amazing man.
It really gave like a special twist to it, I have
good.
to say. Yes,
Good.
definitely.
Good.
Well, the fact that I really admire, that you and Guillermo were like, so much frontline in all of this. Like, this was just amazing. Like I was saying to you on Sunday after the movie that it really felt like, you were like, war journalists or, something like that, because you were really like, inside the story. Like, and how did you cope actually, with, say, the most difficult moments, like, for these documentaries or, also for other ones that...
You take enormous care.
Yeah.
I mean, both Guillermo and I have worked in war zones.
Yeah.
Guillermo was a news reporter for many years. I made films in Yugoslavia, in Chechnya. The big thing is you plan. I mean, and if anybody's thinking of doing it, honestly plan. And know who you're dealing with, I suppose. And that sounds silly, because how do I know Chapo Guzman? But actually the truth is, I was never in danger the only danger I was in was the Americans would come in and do something, but they weren't going to. I was never in danger with them. You were in danger when you were travelling.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then the only other time which was really, really, really dangerous, and it was really dangerous, was when his wife got very upset that we went to his son's chapel.
Yeah.
And it was because Chapo had given us permission, but she hadn't. And she had refused us earlier.
Yeah.
And so we were sort of contradicting her demands, and she was very angry. And it's very difficult to communicate in the film, but that was the one moment where we felt out of control, because the unique thing in Sinaloa is, of course, you can't go to the police. You've got nobody to go to, because the authorities are as corrupted as the gangs. And in fact, you're safer with the gang than you are with the... So.
Talking about tonight, there is going to be the international premiere of Oink, your latest movie. So I want to know everything about it, or at least everything that you can tell me.
I can tell you anything you want. Have you seen it or not?
No,
you haven't.
Not yet. But I'm going to be there tonight.
Good. Well,
yes.
I'm thinking everybody should come. It's a film. the world premiere was in Sheffield on Tuesday,
Right.
and somebody said to me afterwards, in the Q&A, they said, "Angus, that wasn't a film about pigs, was it? It was a film about us." And that was the happiest I've felt about it. It's not. It's got all the elements, but
Right.
it's not a film telling you not to eat pork. It's not a film about how meat consumption and the environment may be destroying the world. Those are elements in it, but at its heart, I think, it's about who we are as human beings and it's probably very obvious, but I'm not sure I've seen it. Well, I hope I haven't seen it. You facing up to it in such an immediate way, because one of the features of pigs is we make children's stories, cartoons, and you do it in Italy, we do it in Britain, in America, in China, and we persuade our children to love them, and then when we get older we write parables about them, and George Orwell writes Animal Farm about pigs, and
That's right,
it can be
yeah.
positive or negative, but they're still there, and then Margaret Atwood writes about them in her dystopian fictions, Pigoons, and all the way along this weird relationship we have, we eat them.
That's right. Yeah.
And so it's a completely fascinating mix of what we are as human beings, that we are at once incredibly violent and incredibly sentimental. And I think the film's a study of that. It's told around... when I started the film, I discovered that pigs in the wild, if you just leave pigs out there, they'll live for 20 years. Yeah?
Right. Yeah.
We, everywhere in the world, it doesn't matter, we kill them at 6 months. You never let a pig, if you're growing a farmer, and it can be a nice organic farmer and it can be an industrial, sort of 25 weeks, 24, 25 weeks, and that's because they hit puberty. So we kill pigs and eat them at puberty, because that's the moment the more feeding becomes less efficient.
All right. Yeah.
Because they're growing up.
Yeah.
They're suddenly interested in sex and drugs and rock and roll. So we kill them at that point. And so I thought, okay, 24 weeks, that's about the length of time in which one makes a documentary. And so I've structured the film around the life and death of a pig. We filmed a pig being born, and what happens is it's a story in 8 chapters until the pig's death at the end, when we kill it. And the film uses, and that we anthropomorphize this little pig who's called Dorothy, and she becomes the narrator of the film, which you can either think is silly or works or doesn't work, but actually it's almost the silliness of it that I'm interested in.
It's the main character.
Well,
So,
she's sort
yeah,
of...
Yeah.
She stands for something. She stands for the very thing we're talking about. We turn her into a friend and we kill her.
Yeah. I understand what you mean.
And what she then allows me to do is, it's called Life in 8 Chapters, and we go to China, where the consumption of pork is the single best... it's not the single best, but it is one of the most accurate ways of following Chinese economic development.
Right. Okay.
In that pork consumption has gone up, and the figure is so breathtaking. It has gone up 3,300% in 50 years. And that
That's
is
huge.
a absolute. They eat over half the world's pigs now. And it's a study of that, and it's a study of some, and later in the film, it's a study of the implications of that in terms of, but not solely in China, in terms of antibiotics. We we go off all over the place. I mean, there's religion. There's the fact that pigs are very similar to us physiologically, so there is really serious research being done into genetically modifying pigs so we can use their hearts for transplantation purposes, xenotransplantation.
Yeah.
And we film some surgery from a pig to a baboon, which I think will prove quite controversial. And at the same time, we go and we find somebody who keeps a pig as a pet, and the pig sleeps in their bed. And the film is sort of held together by the life of Dorothy. And at the end, you will see there is a very extreme scene of a pig decomposing, because they decompose exactly like we do.
Of course, yeah, that's nature.
If you leave us somewhere.
Yeah.
No, but they're also, all their quality of their skin and everything is exactly the same as ours. So it is exactly the same process as if you used a human. And it's part of the research is used for forensics, actually.
Right,
to
that's
tell
true.
how long the body's been.
Yeah.
So that's the film. It's, I hope it's very funny, very shocking, and makes you think. It's a strange film. I made a similar film in constructural terms. In other words, I've done it before of splitting a film into chapters, using a fairy tale then. But I've never quite done it like this.
So I'm really, really looking forward, to watch it tonight.
Good. Good. Well, I hope you like it.
I will, I'm sure, because I like all your work. And Angus, I really, really thank you for being with us. And this is like really a gift to talk to you, because you're really inspiring us all with your work.
Oh, it's always a privilege doing this stuff, because I've made a living out of going and doing things that are interesting, which is a privilege.
That's awesome. So thank you so much again.
Pleasure.